The Wii U was a pretty fantastic console. Not only did its unique design allow for asynchronous multiplayer titles, unobtrusive co-op play, and loads of immersive game gimmicks, but it came with a ton of secondary utilities, like it can play any Wii game you want, even your WiiWare titles, and it's got lovely light blue game cases that fill me with unreasonable amory. Basically, regardless of its debatable objective quality, I'm personally in love with it. It's my favorite game system, and I play it at least once a week, sometimes more than that. So today, we're going to run through my darling Wii U's digital library, taking a sweethearted look at my favorite installed games, why I love them so, and why the console's still a dominant feature of the living room entertainment stand. And honestly, I can't think of a better place to start than the Virtual Console, which is where my majority playtime resides. To be brief, the Virtual Console was a subset of the Wii U eShop, where you could buy emulated games from prior generations. I made ample use of the feature, and we're going to run through a few of my favorite Virtual Console games. I hope you enjoy. Animal Crossing Wild World is a charming little life sim that, honestly, you probably don't need explained to you. It's about creating a healthy, happy life for yourself and the community around you, shaping the town in the ways you can, accepting the things you cannot change, and getting a little more responsible and a little friendlier every day. Unlike, say, The Sims, Animal Crossing focuses more on the personal, emotional aspects of life. It's about taking things slow and relishing in the lackadaisical mundanity of your surroundings. To that end, there isn't much of a traditional gameplay loop. You don't have needs to fulfill, or urgent bills to pay, or friendships you must maintain. Instead, there's a delicate balance of freedom and consequence. You can neglect everyone around you, but then they'll leave and you'll get less unique items and interactions from them. You can ignore your town's health, but then it'll sprout weeds everywhere. You can run everywhere you like, but then you'll destroy flowers, scare bugs and fish, and annoy villagers. And lastly, you can spend all your money if you want, but then, well, you'll be broke. There's not really a win or loss state because the game trusts you to make your own routine and live your own life within the universe's limitations. And those limitations are what give the game its texture and meaning. Like, you can't really interact with much of the decorations in your home, but their lack of explicit function provides more opportunity to play pretend, building a dream home of emotional substance rather than physical utility. Or there's the lucid, highly intelligent villagers with strong personalities. They tend to repeat themselves often, and most of them live rather bland lives, but they still provide insights into humanity through their comedy, criticism, and charity. Animal Crossing Wild World isn't just about creating the world you want to see, it's about accepting the world's natural beauty. A harmonious balance of both is ideal, and I think that balance was disrupted in later entries, which is why this is my favorite. Next up, Mighty Final Fight is a stylish NES beat-em up that effectively functions as training wheels for the genre. It's a great game to learn about spacing, how to read enemies, when to attack or counterattack, the difference between common character archetypes, and generally internalize the utilities of simplistic brawling mechanics. As opposed to most beat-em-ups, there are only 2 enemies on screen at a time, allowing for more player experimentation and slower-paced combat. There's a relatively low skill floor and high skill ceiling, but the game overall is pretty forgiving. There's also a progression system wherein you gain experience based on how stylishly and skillfully you dispatch your foes. This discourages cheesing and encourages experimenting with a variety of combos and alternate attack methods at your disposal. It's pretty smart design and further bolsters the game's validity as a teaching tool. Lastly, it's also pretty charming as an adaptation of the Final Fight series. Mighty Final Fight is smaller, crazier, and sillier than its main series counterparts, providing parodical twists on familiar characters and mechanics. In just one example, you can damage the first boss's health bar by attacking his ego in the pre-fight dialogue. I get a pretty good smile out of that every time. Overall, it's not like Mighty Final Fight is my favorite way to punch baddies, but it's good to start up now and again, just to see if I've gotten rusty. And lastly, Double Dungeons is a fantasy first-person dungeon crawling RPG which, well, is basically a glorified series of monotone mazes. and surprisingly, my affection for it only grows deeper with time. Granted, I do love mazes, I do love fantasy, and I do love RPGs, but Double Dungeons is excessively simplistic. There are very few enemy sprites, minimal environmental graphics, and only a couple background tracks to listen to. Each dungeon can take over an hour to complete, there's more than 20 of them, and the gameplay loop basically just involves grinding. In spite of all that, or maybe because of it, I find Double Dungeons extremely romantic. It stands staunchly and says, no, a couple music tracks is fine, the streamlined combat is fine, the plane progression mechanics are fine, the environments are fine. This is a game about exploring mazes, fighting monsters, and saving the day. That's all you need. And it's kinda right. When you drop into a level, you're given a brutally bare plot description and then just told to figure things out. Figuring things out, as established, involves wandering through samey hallways, grinding against repetitive foes. But there is something deeply meditative in this distillation of dungeon crawling, something pure and whole. I love gradually unraveling the mazes piece by piece, using enemies as landmarks until the entire environment is as familiar as my backyard. I only intended to record a few minutes of footage for this bit, but I honestly didn't want to stop playing. Double Dungeons is soulful and charming in its sheer cussedness. It refuses to be anything more than what it is. It's not ambitious or creative or innovative, but it exists anyway. And you can take it or leave it. But the Wii U didn't just pack a substantial virtual console, it also housed a wide variety of original downloadable titles. There were a few high-profile releases, but the library was largely comprised of indie oddballs. I grabbed a fair share of both, and we're going to talk about those next. Starting with Pokemon Rumble U, a top-down arena brawler and sequel to the original Pokemon Rumble. This game was poorly received on release, but it's a personal favorite of mine for its touching story and tight game design. Basically, you play as capsule toys which were washed away from their store display, and you have to make your way back, traveling through amusement parks and city centers. Along the way, you'll confront other lost toys who have forgotten their purpose, and slowly turn them to your side, predictably by fighting them. It's both a somber and soft-hearted game about clarity of purpose, and how none of us matters as much alone as we do together. We all have the same goal. This is best contrasted in the villain, who sees other toys as his competition rather than his comrades. The gameplay is just as solid, dropping you in super saturated, hyperactive arcadia arenas with incredibly overbearing music and flooding you with hordes of enemies. The outcome is chiefly decided by how well you cope with all the noise and take control of the battlefield. New gimmicks and micro-objectives are steadily introduced over time, turning each stage into a mad dash for victory. You're always getting new allies too, so there's never time for any particular Pokemon or particular moveset to get stale. The swift pacing really suits the game's short runtime to boot. So yeah, Pokemon Rumble U is all around a really good time. 8-Bit Hero is a game I love far more than I love playing. It's a hack-and-slash adventure game with a unique perspective, where you predictably play as 8-bit heroes on a quest to defeat the vile Queen of the North. To this end, you travel across many biomes, fighting many diverse enemies and evading many diverse traps on the way to her domain. The first thing I would like to point out is just how striking the visual style is. No one particular part of it stands out, but it all comes together in a rather unique vibe. Heavily pixelated 2D sprites imposed on abstract 3D environmental set pieces combined with bombastic lighting effects and seemingly impossible perspectives? Yes, please. This whole game feels like I'm on the edge of space itself. 8-Bit Hero is shamelessly idiosyncratic in the way it portrays its reality. Intentional or not, that rocks. And the second thing I would like to point out is that the game is very amateurish. Immediately after the visual style, the unfortunate bugs and hangups were the second most obvious aspect. But so, what about the gameplay? Well, it's really mixed. There are a ton of creative ideas here, that's for sure. Take the dark spirits in the second level, for example. They stay on the very edge of your lantern's light, always chasing you, but never getting too close. However, if you're too careless and accidentally walk into a corner with them chasing behind, you're trapped. Your only option is to walk right into them and die. It's a clever way to force the player to consider their movement more consciously. But for every cool idea, there are questionable ones, like the boss of Goblin Mountain, which is a constantly spawning mass of bomb-hurling ghosts that chase you along a track. Also, there's an avalanche. It took me forever to figure out you're supposed to actually kill all the ghosts and not just survive. This is because the game gives you no indication there's a limited number of enemies and they just keep coming. Add the previously mentioned confusing visuals to that, and you've got a generally unpleasant time. I really do like the way 8-Bit Hero looks, moves, and its creative heart, but it's not quite up to snuff on a functional level, which is a huge shame. Lastly, Wings of Magloryx is an incredibly garish, amateurish indie effort with some seriously surreal game design. Basically, your goal, as Dragon King Magloryx, is to retake your kingdom from the evil druid Horch. You do this by blasting at stationary enemies perched on equally stationary towers, while occasionally rescuing some peasants or gold. The game has transparent aspirations of arcadey greatness, but it's both too bizarre and too imbalanced. The design means well, at least, and there are thin foundations of risk-reward at play, like is it worth tanking some hits to rescue citizens, or is it better to blast the baddies and get the level over with quicker? What order should you destroy the towers in? Because if you prioritize incorrectly, you could lock yourself out of some bonus points, and those bonus points do matter because they're used to buy power-ups. Said power-ups, unfortunately, are also where the imbalance creeps in. There are so many tools and upgrades you can buy, but the health refill and invincibility powers are the cheapest, so you'll just want to buy as many of those as you can. They ensure optimal survivability for minimal cost, making the game trivially easy and invalidating most of the combat variety. But even if the low difficulty and monotone gameplay don't bother you, the game just runs bad. It moves so slow, so consistently that it actually makes stages take longer, and it's not as though there's much to do besides strafing and shooting, so you'll quickly be driven mad. All of that said, Wings of Magloryx is still a wild ride. Sure, it's plain offensive to the eyes, ears, and mind, but there are some audiovisual set pieces in this game that, by accident or otherwise, left a powerful impression. And there's something to be said for just how indie this project is. It's clearly a product of passion, and concerns of polish, playability, and proper balancing were all secondary to getting the thing made. On some level, I can respect that. The Wii U is probably more fondly remembered for its exclusives and hardware eccentricities than any of the titles I'd covered here, but this video was about my Wii U and its stories to begin with. The downloadable content on these systems gives them a kind of character, an archaeological insight into both our culture and the individuals who actually owned the console. In a way, that's what this was all about, preserving the place feelings and unique texture of some small, sweet-hearted part of humanity's time on this earth.